Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we continue into the Sonyverse with what is actually the first reboot in our reboot-heavy series on the Spider-Man theatrical live-action... Well, not all live-action. We'll get there.
Theatrically released films.
Theatrically released Spider-Man films.
Yep.
With The Amazing Spider-Man.
Not really that amazing, though. Welcome to Medium Shift. I am Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And indeed, this is a continuation of our Into the Sonyverse, as yet untitled, ongoing Spider-Man series into all the theatrically released Spider-Man films. This is, ironically, even though we've made constant jokes about reboots, this is the first, but not the last, proper reboot they're actually going to be looking at in Mark Webb's 2012 The Amazing Spider-Man. Obviously, I would recommend listening to the previous episodes to catch you up to this point, even though this movie is not connected to the original Raimi trilogy. In many ways, it is very much fundamentally defined by those films. So being familiar with those will definitely help. All that being said, what did you think of Amazing Spider-Man?
So it's been said a lot, especially on the internet. It's always said that Tobey Maguire was a really good Peter Parker and a terrible Spider-Man, and Andrew Garfield was a really good Spider-Man and a terrible Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. And I think that basically sums up this movie as well, just in general, in that the Spider-Man parts are pretty well done. Everything where he's Peter Parker is not great. There's only one redeeming feature, and that is the chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone.
Yeah, I was about to say...
They're the only two people I care about.
Yeah. They're, if any... I do find it really funny how you kind of define it to those previous films, because I really feel like the constant Achilles heels of the original Spider-Man Raimi trilogy is the romantic subplots and the melodrama and the chemistry between the two leads and everything like that. And that is just the first thing that straight off the bat they immediately fix in this film. To the detriment of everything else, though. But
yeah.
Yep.
And it does lead... I know I'm jumping very far into the end of the movie, but you bring up the melodrama. While I like that they got rid of a lot of the melodrama, it felt like they must have had some sort of quota, because the last 20 minutes, they're like, well, let's cram all of the melodrama we couldn't fit into the rest of this movie into this last 20 minutes. Yep. Just stuff it in there.
Just chuck it
even
all
if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we're going to make, questionable death promises just for the sake of it, even though it has no real meaning, and they're going to have angst because of it, and so on and so forth, and it's just... Yeah.
But it's fine. We'll clear that out in the last minute.
Yeah, sure.
Just wash that all away.
Yep. Until they don't acknowledge that in the second movie. But anyway, we'll get to that another time. But yeah, I think this movie isn't very good. I'll be honest. I think it's just like... Look, this is probably going to be a controversial opinion or a hot take in some regards, but I would prefer to watch Spider-Man 3 again than rewatch this movie. I saw this film in cinemas. I hadn't seen it until I rewatched it for this podcast. And while Spider-Man 3 is a movie of highs and lows, this film is just a constant thread of just middle of the road, kind of flat stylistically. I think some of the action is fine. I don't think any of it's especially special. I think the villain is generally quite poor. Really, the only one good thing I think it has going for it is Emma Stone and Gwen Stacy. And the fact that they actually give her something to do.
Yes.
Imagine that. But everything else, I think this is just... I was watching with my brother at the time, and he referred to this Spider-Man as Walmart Spider-Man, because it is just watered-down, generic brand Spider-Man stuff, where they hit all of the same tropes of the first movie, but don't do anything especially interesting. Kind of rejig some elements, but I don't think adds enough new or novel or curious ideas to actually make it worthwhile. Yeah, I was
even his suit looks like someone took Tobey Maguire's suit and just went, okay, we need a slightly off-copyright version for Halloween stores.
It looks like an off-brand Spider-Man suit, doesn't it? Yeah, like especially the eyes. Like the fact that
they
the
creep
yellow.
me out.
Yeah, he looks genuinely creepy. Like they're yellow and they're too angular and thin. If I saw that person, I would he looks more like a supervillain when you just see his face. Than a superhero, which is just doesn't work. There is no warmth or empathy in that mask or anything.
On the plus side, he does lose that mask a lot.
He does. By God, they do not care about his secret identity in this movie at all. He's really, really bad at it. There's even that scene at the beginning when he's trying to web swing for the first time, jumps off a building, and then swings down and lands on a bunch of tables. There's no one around, but by God, was that caught on camera or something like that. And then his mask gets taken off at the end. He immediately tells Gwen Stacy that he's Spider-Man. Gwen Stacy's dad finds out he's Spider-Man. What's his name? The villain finds out he's Spider-Man just because he has his name on his camera that he has nearby.
I'm pretty sure everyone at the school knows he's Spider-Man. If just from all the sports stuff he does, like bending the football goals.
Yep, or breaking the basketball ring. Really unsubtle stuff. And all that starts happening the moment that a superhero shows up with super strength. Yeah, righto, mate. Yeah, no, just does not really care for it. Which, I'm not massively bothered by, but I did think it was a weird, ongoing thing for this movie that it just constantly derided the fact that there is no, there's a constant thing that we talk about in the original movie where, the dichotomy between Spider-Man and Peter Parker and, what's his name? One is the mask, one is not, blah, 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 blah. And there's just, none of that really coming through this at all, which I just thought was strange. Despite that line at the end that says, your boyfriend is a man of many masks or something like that. I'm like, but is he? Is he really? I don't actually know if there's much
He has
of a
one
distinction
mask.
there.
It's barely on him.
Yeah, basically. It's constantly being taken off. Hell, you took it off him yourself just in the previous scenes. So,
yes.
Yeah.
But that line is a great summation of this film, because this film feels like a film of many masks, that it cannot decide what it wants to be. It is a spy film. It is a science fiction film. It is an action film. It is like a weird drama, not melodrama, but just
high school drama, basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's teen film, but also some weirdly adult moments in it. And
It's also kind of Batman Begins, or heavily inspired by Batman Begins, while also not being at the same time. That's what I kind of talk about at the beginning of this film kind of being stylistically flat, because I don't think there's anything especially notable or even strong about the direction. It's just kind of a bunch of different disparate elements. And that's possibly because of we should definitely talk about the director in some regards. Obviously, Sam Raimi, when he was brought on for Spider-Man 1, had quite a significant career prior to that. Whereas in this film, this is a trend that's happened a lot with superhero movies, but basically a studio got an indie director who made a really popular and well-liked film, but generally just his first or second film, almost always a guy as well, and then bring them into making a really big, high-budget movie, basically because he doesn't have any necessary clout and is much easier to control. Let's be real. And that's what Mark Webb, who, as much as I like the normative determinism of his name, was the reason he was brought into this. He had directed only one film prior to this, granted a lot of other video shorts and music videos and such, but one theatrical release, which was 500 Days of Summer, which is a good and interesting film, though I would not watch that movie and think, yeah, this guy should make a Spider-Man movie.
Yep.
And then going on from there, he was just brought on to basically reboot the franchise after Sam Raimi kind of left over creative differences and not being happy with the script for Spider-Man 4, so... No. And I just I don't necessarily have anything against Mark Webb. I like 500 Days of Summer. I think that is an interesting, if somewhat problematic film looking at it these days. He's directed another film recently called Gifted, which is really good. But I just don't... There is nothing about the direction of this film that is anything especially notable or makes me think that he was just the director of choice to direct a big blockbuster Spider-Man movie.
The name is the biggest indicator.
Look, that did write a lot of headlines wrote themselves when he was announced as director. I will give them that at the very least. But if that was the sole reason that Mark Webb was chosen, readjust your priorities, mate.
I mean, look, a lot of Sony's decisions seem to be made by the marketing department more than anything.
Well,
so
yeah, true. Or
who knows?
or completely out of touch executives, which like the Sony leaked emails would suggest.
Oh god.
Yeah, look, I mean,
I forgot about those.
we should bring them up at some point, but there is a very interesting perspective we have on like the Sony like Spider-Man franchise because of the Sony email hack of, was it 2016, 2015?
Yeah, 16, I think.
Yeah, mid 2010s at the very least, where a lot of like private emails between studio execs and such kind of got leaked and kind of showed how questionable some of the pitches from producers were about not only Spider-Man but other franchises. And it kind of became a joke at the time about how completely off the ball Sony was when handling Spider-Man, which like until they made the decision to, you know, actually sell them to the MCU, and they've been going on strong since then while letting someone else deal with creative stuff, but we'll get to that in a later episode.
Yes.
For now, at the very least, I feel like this movie kind of shows that the Sony was keeping a firm hand on the wheel, both in this film and even more so in the sequel as well, but once again, we'll get to that too. I just kind of like, I'm not really sure what this movie is trying to be as an origin story too. The way this film was sold, also the fact that this came out only 5 years after Spider-Man 3, which is not a big gap when rebooting a franchise.
No.
And a lot of people derided it for it at the time.
Isn't that the same gap between the adaptations of Death at a Funeral?
Yeah, potentially. Something like that. Was it 2002 and 2007 or something? I don't remember.
Yeah,
maybe even earlier.
I think it was a 5-year gap, though.
Yeah, sure. Either way, like it's not a lot of time has passed, and Spider-Man 3 was such a monstrous hit, and so on and so forth. So, that like the specter of the original 3 films just hangs over this movie perpetually. And especially thing I noticed in the marketing coming up to this movie, but it was constantly being sold as like the untold story of the origin. You can find out the secrets about his parents and like the true reason he has his powers and everything like that.
Spoiler alert, you don't.
Yeah, it's not. my first note when I was watching some of the trailers before I watched this film, and it comes up with the untold story, and I'm like, the untold story, because it's just the same story from Spider-Man 1 over again. There's that opening preamble at the beginning, something about his parents that is like barely referenced after that scene. And then after that, it just becomes like kind of a rehash a lot of the same points, but all just slightly rejigged just to say that it's different enough from the original Spider-Man movie, while also still kind of being the same. So,
yeah. Look at us. There's a bit more government conspiracy in this. Look, there's potential. Look, Proto-Goblin.
Yep.
He's evil, and there's shady things and shady people all around, and like, okay, they have no impact on the plot. Why are they here?
Because Oscorp has a big tower or something. That's different. There's a bunch of spiders, not just one. It's just kind of like...
Also, the Lizard's involved now.
Yeah, also the Lizard too, which is amusing considering they built up the character of the Lizard in Spider-Man 2 and 3, and then just completely reintroduced him as a new character here.
Yep, with none of the build-up and none of the empathy.
Yeah, and none of the pathos. He's just a blatantly bad guy. Like, I find it so strange, especially, like, considering... And maybe it's potentially because they were trying to distance themselves from the Raimi films, but all of Raimi's villains are, like, sympathetic or have, like, some sort of dichotomy going on with them in there. And, like, Connors has that to some extent, like, it's kind of implied that the lizard part kind of takes over his brain, and that's why he wants to turn everyone into lizards and everything. But
they
like
have that scene where he's talking to himself.
Yep.
But not as well done as it was in the Sam Raimi film.
No, it's literally just him talking to a camera and then just bragging about his end of the world. Side note, that PowerPoint presentation that starts when Peter walks into his secret underground lab, just conveniently explaining what exactly is going to happen. So yeah, but like there is no necessary like sympathy for this guy at all. You don't necessarily feel sorry for him or like the fact that he's struggling with being the lizard or anything like that. If you want to talk about the sources too, like a lot of the times when he first becomes the lizard in the comics, he just becomes this animal basically, like, and so trying to save him from being the lizard is trying to return him to his humanity. But that doesn't really happen in this movie because he keeps to wanting to become the lizard and then turn everyone else into lizards at the same time because sure.
Yeah, which, I mean, there's a little bit in some versions of Spider-Man where he does have lizard people, but that's usually confined to the video game stories and usually just an excuse so you can punch henchmen that look like lizards.
Yeah. I will specify, there are like a lot of iterations of Lizard in the comics, as is always. The first one was originally animalistic, fought him in Florida, so on and so forth. But one of the later ones, it eventually, there became a dual identities between the two of them, where the Lizard had a semblance of human intelligence. It was basically very similar to the version of Lizard in this film, when he was like still hyper intelligent and thought that humanity was a curse that needed to be cured with lizardness. So that has a precedent in the comics at the very least, but that happened later in the development of the character, and it still doesn't necessarily distinguish between Kurt Connors and the Lizard having the same goal. In the comics, it's always like a fundamentally distinct identities, which you don't really have that distinction in this movie, which is I think a strange choice. And like, I feel like it's almost a way to distance themselves from the villains in the original movies, but if so, then that's a bad decision. So,
Also, in the various other versions, the lizardifying aspect of it is usually a bit more permanent. Like, at least it lasts a while before he gets like either the cure or it slowly leaves his system or whatever. It's not one day and then he injects himself again with the lizard formula.
Yeah, exactly. It's not Owlman. It's not like you get an hour of being the Lizard and then you go back to being normal. It's like, it has more consequences than that, basically.
Yes.
Yep.
And that was another reason why I couldn't sympathize with him, because he's like, this lizard thing, it's taking over. He has a conversation with himself in the sewer, and then I'm like, okay, stop injecting yourself then. Just leave it.
Yep. Maybe don't. Yeah, look, maybe if they like made it clear that there was like a second part of his identity that was being taken over by the Lizard, like if it almost showed like kind of a Gollum Smeagol kind of dynamic, but if that's what they're going for, they don't depict it properly at all, because I don't think any of that is clear. Basically, what I'm saying is the villain in this movie is bad, just flat out. And I think one of the reasons that the movie just doesn't really work for me, because one of the strongest points of all three original Spider-Man films was the villain. You can listen to all our previous episodes as we kind of talked about that. And villains that were all still similar to this movie in that they are still kind of inspired by the comics, but change a number of fundamental aspects in a way that I think works. And that this film does as well, but I think ultimately to its detriment. Very much so.
Also, quick question, because although I am a big comics guy, Spider-Man is sort of a bit of a blind spot for me. Can the Lizard control smaller lizards in the comics?
There has been versions of the Lizard that can control smaller lizards, yes.
Okay.
That is actually a thing. Not
okay, because they were the
versions.
only highlight to the villain of that entire thing was, look at the cute little lizard.
Yep.
Look at them tightrope walking on the web.
Yeah, which is like in one scene and then they never really acknowledge again. I was really hoping he would summon like a swarm of iguanas at the end or something like that. They're all climbing up the side of the Oscorp Tower. It would have been like visually interesting at least. But yeah, like as the Lizard, there's been a number of like the Lizard identity and such, and the Lizard formula and so on and so forth is constantly being developed in the comics. There is one horrifying story at some point when he was I don't remember the exact context, I don't remember what storyline it was in, but essentially Connors turns into the Lizard in the same alleyway as his son Billy, and ends up eating his son in a way that lizards often do, and the trauma of that is so horrifying that it essentially represses Connor's identity for like a long time after that, basically, which is a whole thing. There you go.
I can see why they didn't include that in the movie.
Yeah, potentially. But I am confused why they didn't give him a wife and son. I figured that would have made it like an easy way to make him sympathetic. But yeah, I mean, who knows? As I said, like this movie makes a lot of weird choices when it comes to like adaptation and what elements it takes and what it doesn't, because it tries to add new intrigue regarding like Peter's parents in the comics actually as well. Both of his parents, I believe, were SHIELD agents in a lot of iterations. Like it's been retconned a couple of times over the years. I think they were FBI at some point. Other times they've been SHIELD agents. But either way, they've always had some sort of like secret identity or something that Peter finds out about in his history. So that is
I'm pretty sure there was one continuity where his parents weren't even his parents. They were Uncle Ben and Aunt May.
Yeah. I remember that. That's the really creepy, unpleasant story, which has like a really sexy Aunt May, which was for a time rumored to be being produced at Sony. So that kind of like, yep. Yep, speaks to whatever the hell they were doing at the time.
Yes, but I feel Sexy Aunt May is something we will talk about in a future episode.
Oh, that'll come. Hey,
Yes.
Marvel brings Sexy Aunt May on themselves, so
Yes.
ugh, boy, that was another choice. But anyway, once again, we'll get there. We have to stop alluding to future movies. We've got to talk about this one.
Oh, do we have to?
Yeah, I know, but we got to get through these tough ones and we can get to some good ones again down the line.
Yes.
So regarding like other parts of adaptation and such, one thing I do at least they try and elevate more is that Peter is definitely more confident as Spider-Man than he is as Peter Parker. Like, as much as I think Andrew Garfield is bad playing a nerdy loner, mostly because he listens to pop music and he skateboards and all that, like, really, their version of, like, awkward loner in this movie is just struggle to talk sometimes, which, like, I don't like that depiction at all. But I do
Like, 9 times out of 10, he would be, like, the cool protagonist.
Yeah, like, I mean, God, look at his hair. He looks like an anime protagonist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, real dumb. But I do appreciate in this that he at least made some jokes sometimes, I guess. And he does feel more confident in the suit than not. As you kind of illustrated at the top, I think like Andrew Garfield works a lot better as Spider-Man than he does Peter Parker. Even if I don't know if there is a lot of content around him to necessarily support him sometimes. So, yep. Despite all of the Batman influences, which I do think is strange. The fact that most of this movie takes place at night, the fact that at one point he is glowering on a gargoyle, which I just thought was like a little bit over the top. Like, I mean, Mark Webb...
Wait for the symbiote suit, at least.
yeah, exactly. Then he can glare on a gargoyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Webb cited in an interview like 3 major influences, which was the original Ditko Spider-Man comics, which is normal for every Spider-Man origin story. Yep. The Ultimate comics, which I can also kind of see as being a modern update of that, especially the idea of Oscorp Tower, what's the name? The spider coming from Oscorp is from the Ultimate comics. He also fights a villain in the school after the villain discovers his identity. Like, all of those are plot points from Ultimate. But then he also cites Batman Begins, which I think speaks to the state of superhero movies at the time in 2012, which is weird because like the Avengers came out in the same year as this movie. But as a lot of people have talked about before, but Batman Begins and like the success of the Dark Knight trilogy spurned that kind of gritty remake era or gritty reboot era. And like a little bit of that DNA shows up in this movie. And I'm not a huge fan. So
yeah,
yep.
There's just the one thing they always seem to miss, which is the Dark Knight trilogy was made by Christopher Nolan, who his bread and butter is dark and gritty action.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, if you try that, you get Christopher Nolan. You don't get a guy who made a really good deconstruction of rom-coms.
Yeah. It's not like Spider-Man doesn't fit into that mold.
No.
Nor does Superman, Zack Snyder, but anyway. Yeah, I just think it's like... I get that it's, once again, aping the popular thing at the time, but I just don't know if it's necessarily useful when we're talking about the tonal and stylistic mesh that is this movie. So, no wrestling scene as well. I'm just looking through my notes now. I figured you would be upset about that. But his costume is inspired by a wrestling mask, so at least they allude to that element from the comics, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, but, like, even then, I'm pretty sure I have, like, Mexican wrestling masks that look more like the Spider-Man mask than his did.
Well, yeah, true. He starts from a wrestling mask and then goes in many, many different directions, so... Oh,
and at one point he falls into a wrestling ring. That. Oh
yes, yeah. That. Well, that's when he sees this. That's when he sees the poster. Yep. So there is that. So at least there is that allusion to the original element from the comics in the original film.
Yeah.
So.
And he does pull off a very nice hurricanrana.
I'll pretend.
In one of the fight scenes.
I'll pretend I know what that means. Great wrestling moves. Yeah, bravo.
A wrestling move from Lucha Libre, which is the very acrobatic wrestling, which is very inspired by, which like inspired a lot of Spider-Man's movesets as well.
Right.
And the mask wearing, it's the Mexican style that you sort of come to know.
Okay, sure. No, fair enough.
So that was a nice touch.
Do you think it was intentional or?
Oh, God, no. But
at least it's in there, I guess. So,
yes.
Yep. I do find it interesting as well, particularly when we're talking about like kind of its connection to the original films. Mark Webb specifically doesn't describe this film as a reboot, just like as it says it's new characters and a new universe. which I think is like just more getting into the etymology of what exactly a reboot is. I think the I think the colloquial.
I'm pretty sure that is a reboot. He defined a reboot.
Yeah, I think what his interpretation of reboot would be is that it's like he's thinking of reboot and soft reboot is interchangeable. That like soft reboot is the concept of necessarily starting fresh, but with still like tenuous connections to the previous film or iteration and so on and so forth. Whereas then like a hard reboot, which is what this movie is like maintaining the ideas but like completely reinventing, like completely starting with a slate clean. So, which this movie does.
Oh, maybe in that case this isn't a reboot because this has way too many connections and similarities to the first ones.
Well, yes, true. But if anything, it's a reiterating rather than a continuation of the first film. So, one of the other things, as I kind of like put up the top. But I really think like this movie ended up the way that it did. Less so because of the comics and more so because it was following on from the original Spider-Man trilogy. Like, I think as a source or as a reason that this movie got made in the way that it did, that's just, more important, I think. One of the things we should definitely talk about, and one of the big positives between changing from the original films to this one, is that they swapped out love interests.
Yes.
Yep, for Mary Jane to Gwen Stacy, which I just think works a lot better. Not only because Emma Stone is great, but because she's actually given stuff to do in this movie. And has some level of autonomy and actually has really, really good chemistry with Andrew Garfield. And Andrew Garfield tells her almost immediately that he is Spider-Man, which just like cuts through so much of the mess, which I think is really nice. So, yeah.
And also, like, Gwen Stacy as a character I feel would be better suited for this movie anyway, given the whole science like background and not really knowing each other before coming together kind of thing.
Yep. As you kind of noted at the top, like it has elements of a science fiction film in here and like doubles down on the science, not only with Liz, but also with the web shooters too. We should acknowledge he has homemade web shooters like in the comics as opposed to organic webs in the original film. And so Gwen Stacy being another brighter, quite frankly, science student who was working at Oscorp and then meets Peter through her science class and also helps out in the end by synthesizing an antidote and so on and so forth. Like, not only integrates her more specifically into the film, but actually gives her a lot to do. And it's also, like, pretty faithful to Gwen Stacy in the comics. Like, they nail the look, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
And, like, she has... I feel like she definitely has like a greater degree of identity or autonomy in the film than she does in the original comics, but a lot of the same beats are similar. She almost has like, it's a kind of an interesting combination between the ultimate version of Gwen Stacy, which is actually like similar to Spider-Gwen in that she's kind of a punk rocker and more has like what's like, I don't know, just a punk aesthetic, I guess. Whereas Gwen Stacy in the original comics is much more done up, so it's kind of a combination of those two influences. And I think it works really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emma Stone does a fantastic job in her performance, I do think. Certainly helps that the off-screen chemistry was just as strong as the on-screen chemistry at the time.
Well, guess who started dating during the production of this movie?
Yes.
If anything bodes well for on-screen chemistry, I'm pretty sure it's finding out your two romantic leads start dating afterwards, so... Yep. Must have been clapping their hands together at that.
But yes, I do think the two best performances were from the Stacys in Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone, and Captain Stacy.
Oh, yeah.
Played by Dennis Leary.
I'll be honest, I mostly forgot he was in this movie. He doesn't show up until like 54 minutes into the film.
Oh, yeah, I didn't say it was a long performance. I was just saying it was pretty good.
Okay.
The small amount of time he had there.
Sure, yeah.
Like, comparatively to some of the other performances.
Fair. Yeah, let's talk about Captain Stacy for a little bit. In the comics, like, what's his name? It's actually quite similar in a number of regards. Like, Gwen's father is the chief of police, or a chief of police. I don't know how police hierarchies work. And is actually much more supportive of Spider-Man from the comics almost straight up. Eventually dies in the comics just before Gwen Stacy does, which I guess is a good thing? I don't know. While trying to save a civilian from debris during a battle with Dr. Octopus. So in that regard is actually kind of similar to the way that he plays out in this movie, though the initial antagonistic role that he plays is like completely invented for this, which I think kind of works. I'm not sure. I feel like it was almost fitting into the role of J. Jonah Jameson as kind of like an antagonistic person to Spider-Man in the wider community. without any of the charm or interest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. The whole subplot with the police being really, really heavily against him, and then at the very last minute going, nah, he's cool, just didn't really work, didn't feel right to me. Just, there were some things wrong. And, like, let alone for the scene where they basically send a small group of guys to take out the lizard, and then, like, half an army packed to the brim to take out Spider-Man, despite the fact that the lizard, who is clearly the bigger threat with his biochemical weapons.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say, goddamn priorities, people. You know that there's some sort of biochemical attack happening in Lower Manhattan, and instead you're going to go up against this guy in a leotard. I mean, come on.
Yeah, but yeah, putting that aside, it even just felt like very rushed, I think. Putting that up to the fact that we don't see Captain Stacy until 55 minutes into the movie.
Yep.
And even then, it's not as a captain, it's just as Gwen's dad.
Yeah, I think the first time you see him is in front of the police station, the first time Spider-Man, like, leaves a mugger or something like that to be arrested, and then you find out in the next scene that he's Gwen Stacy's dad. Yeah.
I forgot about that scene because it is so unnecessary.
Yeah, I only noticed that scene because I heard prior to that he doesn't show up until over halfway through the movie, and then when he does, I'm like, there he is.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I just feel like it's another subplot in there just for, like, more added tension, which I don't necessarily know if it needs. I really feel like this movie misses a J. Jonah Jameson figure as well.
It
in
does.
that they very clearly did not want to recast J. Jonah Jameson because J.K. Simmons is so identifiable in that role, which, like, understandable. Like, J.J. doesn't show up in either of these films. But I think that presence is lacking in certain instances, and I feel like using the police and George Stacy to fill that void in the first film just doesn't really work as kind of a lesser alternative, basically.
Yeah. And also, because that is so lacking, it also kind of lacks in the New York getting around Spider-Man. Like, despite all the negative press and stuff he's getting, like, New Yorkers banding together, which was done well in the first Spider-Man, even if it was a little overly patriotic and on the nose.
Yep.
In this case, it felt so unearned.
Oh, yeah, God. Okay, we need to talk about this crane scene. Okay. Yeah, so you didn't like it either? Because I cannot stand this scene. I think it is awful.
I like this scene.
Okay.
But I think, like, within the framework of the scene itself, I think it is a really good Spider-Man scene. I just think it is in the wrong movie.
Sure. If this was, like, the climax of, like, Spider-Man 3 or something like that, after, like, such a long period of, you know, build-up necessarily or something, maybe, sure. But, like, as an emotional beat, I thought it was completely and utterly unearned, and frankly just didn't make sense. Like, what do the cranes contribute? Why he's literally swinging next to buildings that are almost the same height as the cranes. Why, I mean, like, physically and logically, I didn't understand why it was there. Like, emotionally, like, I think it is completely unearned at that point. It's just one dude, which he saved in a scene, which I didn't even recognize the guy to begin with because it was so early in the movie comparatively, who somehow managed to get all of these cranes in an exact line to get Spider-Man to a building, which he could web swing to anyway without the cranes there. Like, I don't understand if he's injured. Like, how is web swinging from a building next to a crane instead of being on a crane any different? I just don't... Yeah, I don't get it. I don't like it. I get that they wanted to have a moment like that, like they do in the original films, but I just thought this was the wrong way to go about it.
Whereas, yeah, I agree with you on a lot of these points, but again, in my heart, I'm like, this is very Spider-Man, because it's like a Peter that is incredibly injured, but still pushing on anyway and webbing up his own wounds to keep going.
I hope that doesn't get infected.
The people of New York trying to help him despite everyone else telling them to stay away from him, kind of thing. I think, like, the ideas and the ethos behind the scene is, like, so representative of the idea of Spider-Man. but I think it is so good. It is just put in the wrong movie with no, like, merit and worth put to the scene. And, yeah, it is kind of ridiculous that cranes are right next to the buildings. Like, if they were on top of the buildings, leading into, say, fucking Manhattan Spire or whatever, where it's, like, the biggest building.
Sure.
There he is. That would make a whole lot more sense. And that scene in a good movie with an actual build-up would work so well and be so representative of Spider-Man. It's just, they put it in this one. And that is their big mistake.
I think we got this scene on the train in Spider-Man 2. Like,
Yeah.
pulling him in and, like, everyone looking at him will take care of your secret identity. And then when Doc Ock comes on, he's like, you have to go through all of us. And I'm like, yeah, great. It's hitting all the same beats. It feels earned. It actually makes sense. It's like, it's the same moment, but just done properly. And so I just don't... Yeah, like, I appreciate that they're aspiring to something at the very least, but I just think execution-wise, just, like, completely... It's completely flopped. It was like that crane in Spider-Man 3 hitting the building instead of going around it, so... Which, like, geez, I surely hope that didn't happen in the movie. No, I know, I wasn't a fan.
To me, it just felt like seeing... what's a good example like this? Like, Michelangelo's David in a McDonald's playpen.
That's a hell of an analogy. Also, bold to just imply that sequence at all, even in Spider-Man 2, is Michelangelo's David, is a hell of a comparison.
Well, no, as in, like, representative of, like, the ideal kind of thing.
Sure, okay. Yep.
In just a room full of cheap plastic.
Yeah. The nugget of artistry surrounded by all of this corporate bullshit. Yeah. Yep. No, fair enough. Look, I can respect that. Even if I was mostly yelling at the screen when that scene was happening. There's a time as well when, like, a cop stops traffic to let Spider-Man web swing through. I'm like, all right, that's just... I mean, it had already lost me at that point, but that was just another nail in the coffin.
Like, how low are these cranes?
Yep. Did he
if he's having to stop traffic?
Yeah. Did he see Spider-Man coming in time? How long had been waiting there to, like, cover the causeway? Did he know that Spider-Man was going to swing low enough that he needed to stop the traffic? Like, I don't know.
Also, what if he hadn't received the call to, like, not shoot at Spider-Man?
Yeah, exactly. What if he gets shot in the other leg? What? He's going to bring out another crane to save him then? It's dumb. It's real dumb. Anyway, how about we move into what we would do differently, being the celebrated Hollywood directors that we are, obviously.
Sure.
Respect to Mark Webb. He had a rough time on these movies. I don't think he deserves all of the blame.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
He just needs to stick with what he's good at.
He's like...
Which is not Spider-Man.
Yep, like nice dramas. Or rom-coms, I guess. Like 500 Days of Summer is great and Gifted is great. So, you know, just like... I don't know. Maybe you'll get another shot at something that's more in his wheelhouse one day.
Yeah. Just... He needs to be, like, given to one of those, like, quote-unquote independent publishers that are, like, funded by the actual major publishers. You know, that they can do the weird stuff with.
Oh, yeah, like, I don't really know what you would call those, but, like, the kind of the Searchlights of the world, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, the Searchlights and the Neon and the A24s, like that kind of thing. Yep, fair. I can...
Just let him have free reign with that and see what happens.
Yeah, sure. I'd be really curious to see, like, especially after 500 Days of Summer, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in there. Yeah, cool. All right, anyway, do it differently?
Yep.
Jingle. All right, do you want to go first or shall I?
Yeah, I'll go first. Mine is pretty simple in the fact that they were studio themselves were very much wanting that sort of weird spy sci-fi kind of mashup thrown in there to your classic Spider-Man story, and they were inspired heavily by the Ultimate Universe and the new comics. And what you want to do then is a character that was introduced in 2010, 2 years before this film was released. Agent Venom.
Oh, okay.
A new take. Keep it... You can either keep it in the Sam Raimi verse, but like as a spin-off, or as its own new subsidy thing, like the Venom movie we got later. But I think something like that, where you can go full science fiction, full action spy thriller, would be really cool.
Would you keep Joe Manganiello from the original Spider-Man films?
Look, it could work.
I mean, like, he became Deathstroke. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
No.
Yeah. Awesome. As kind of like a spin-off of Spider-Man 3 or something like that? Or, like, loosely connected, but not
like,
really.
More of a soft reboot
Right.
spin-off.
Okay, yeah, sure. That, like, it kind of implies that some of
So-
the continuity happened, but, like, not any
Yes.
strong connections.
And Spider-Man is around, but there is no actual Spider-Man character.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure.
And then later on, you can decide if you are making a proper reboot of Spider-Man, you can integrate it back into that
Yep. No, fair enough.
kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
That would give you all the sciencey fiction stuff, because you have the symbiote. And look, if Venom can introduce Venom with no Spider-Man references at all, I feel you can do an Agent Venom with in a soft reboot setting.
Oh yeah, 100%. I would love to see an Agent Venom movie. I just assume that Sony would find a way to screw it over in some way, shape, or form. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Yep.
Look, this is very wishful thinking. So
I mean, this is do it differently. It's always wish fulfillment, so...
yeah, and in this wish, I wish Sony was competent.
Imagine that.
Yes.
Oh, they're going to be bought out by Disney in 10 years. Yeah, fantastic. No, I really like that. I think that's a really great idea. I would love to see anything Agent Venom related. That comic is awesome.
Yes.
Um,
It is.
Yep.
It is so well done, and it would fit so much better with the aesthetic that they were trying to aim for, with especially if it is inspired by Batman Begins.
Yep.
Like this one was meant to be. That would actually make sense for a Dark and Gritty, because it's basically a spy/war film with science fiction elements in it anyway.
You know what directors I would love to see direct an Agent Venom movie? But the directors of John Wick.
Yes.
Chad Stahelski, I think it is. There's been a number of them, obviously, over the 3 films, but like that type of wheelhouse of a director, I think would be so perfect for a film like Agent Venom. You give him a decent enough budget, but not massive enough that it goes like really, really over the top. Keep it grounded, the action. I think that'd be mwah, bravo. Yeah.
But wouldn't you need a director whose name is somehow a pun on Venom?
Well, I don't know how many directors have a name that are a pun on Venom.
Yeah, good question.
I can't think of any. Part of me really, really would love to see the meetings around Sony when they chose Mark Webb. Like, surely it had to be a reason that they chose him just for the name. Like, must be. But yeah, who even knows? Disappointed that wasn't leaked in the emails. Yeah, cool. Anyway, for my Do It Differently, I am actually going to go for similar to you, and that's a soft reboot, but I want to do a soft reboot of the Spider-Man, the Raimi trilogy. So continue the continuity of that to a certain extent, but kind of start fresh, which means that we don't need to do any of the same villains again. We don't need to do the origin story again. Just straight up start up with a new Spider-Man who's already established in the city. They can be a throwaway line or something. Recast Spider-Man 2. I don't know, with Jake Gyllenhaal or something like that. I think that'd be great.
What about Tom Holland?
I think he'd be pretty young at that point. Hello, I'm just here to play Spider-Man. I'm only 14 years old.
Spider Bite.
He was born in 96, I think, so he would have been in 2012. Yeah, 16 years old. Which is actually spot on age for the character, but pretty young for someone playing Spider-Man anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and there can be like a throwaway line that like, oh, Mary Jane dumped me because I was a horrible person in the previous movie, or something like that. And then, like, I would be okay with keeping some of the elements of this film. Like, I think Lizard being the villain after being established in the previous 2 films would be really good. I would introduce his wife and son to actually give him some sense of, some greater sense of sympathy as well. I would not go for super smart Lizard want to turn people into other lizards. Like, he literally becomes animalistic, and it's just Peter trying to save his mentor from, I don't know, eating his kid or something like that. Definitely going to make an allusion to that in the film. Like, I know Sam Raimi wouldn't necessarily be directing this, but if he was, God, imagine the horror. Yeah, and I just, like, I think it'd be so much better than just kind of rehashing the origin, irrespective of whether it's the untold story of it or not. So, yeah, I think that just be work. No one really wanted to see the origin again. And I think it keeps some of the better elements from the previous films while being able to update it in a couple of new ways. So, yeah. Yeah, it's good.
And look, if you really want to do the untold story of the Spider-Man origin, you make the film entirely from the perspective of the spider.
Of the spider.
It ends with him biting Peter Parker, and that's the end of the film.
Yep,
and up until then, it's just him dealing with genetic engineering.
Yeah, it just bites Peter, and then it just immediately cuts to black, and then that's it. There's like an hour and a half of just blackness after that. Yep, it's good. No.
Oh, I was imagining more A Bug's Life meets, like, Upgrade.
I love that idea, actually. That's really good. Yeah, if anything, like, Peter only shows up during the end credit scene or something like that. Like, that's the tease for the next movie. Yep, that's really funny. And he's just fighting, I don't know, an evil genetically engineered grasshopper for the entire film or something. That's cool. Yeah, no,
an actual lizard.
Oh, an actual lizard. Yeah, just a gecko.
Yes.
I guess a gecko would be pretty big in comparison to a spider, so that does kind of track. Weird as hell action sequences, though. God, so many limbs. Anyway, I was going to say, if you want the true untold origin story of Spider-Man, they should have done the Aunt May prequel movie, but anyway.
Oh, God,
that's just me. Cool. Anyway, do we want to move into random recommendations then?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Isn't the intro usually... So what have you got to recommend?
Shh, I'm changing it up.
Directed at me.
Yep. I know. Crazy,
Are
right?
you rebooting now? See...
We're in a perpetual state of rebooting ourselves, I think. Keeping things fresh, you know? Changing up the order.
Yes.
Yep.
Little did you know, but we actually recast Chris and Ev quite a few episodes ago. And we'll probably do it again.
Yep. Without anyone even realizing.
So, my recommendation today, which you're either going to hate or love, 60s Spider-Man.
Yeah, good. Yeah, look, no, I can respect that.
Yeah, that's all I got. Just, it is the complete opposite direction of this film. It's Spider-Man, but he's kind of fun and kind of stupid.
It's nonsense and absurd in kind of the way that a bad animated 60s TV show just could only be, essentially.
Yep.
It's good stuff. I have a lot of fondness for that show. I watched a lot of reruns of that when I was a kid. So, yeah.
Yes. So did I, surprisingly.
Yeah, cool. Good stuff. I can respect that.
Cool.
Right. Well, for my random recommendation, I feel like I've already recommended a lot of the Spider-Man related things that I've done before, but there is a video game of Spider-Man that came out around the same time as this film. I don't remember the exact year, but it was a game called Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. Yeah, it was developed by Beanox, who also ended up making both the Amazing Spider-Man games, which are like adaptations of the movie, and not especially good. But this version is actually really interesting in that it's kind of like a prototypical Into the Spider-Verse in some ways, where it brings together 4 different Spider-Man from different universes. So the original Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Man 2099, and then Ultimate Spider-Man, who was the black suit in this iteration. And then you basically just play through 3 different levels of theirs, each level based around a different villain, trying to get pieces of the Tablet of Order and Chaos that had been scattered across the multiverse after Mysterio kind of did it. Madam Web is in the game. It has a lot of really interesting takes on different villains. They vary up the gameplay bits and pieces from each like universe. And I think it's really good. I have a lot of fondness for it. I've played through that game a lot. And some really cool takes and like alternate universe takes on different Spider-Man. So if you like anything alternate Into the Spider-Verse-esque Spider-Man, I would definitely recommend this one. I'm pretty sure it's still available on Steam, so yeah.
This is the same studio that made Spider-Man Web of Shadows, right?
No. It was...
Oh, no.
This was the studio that took over from the developers of Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Yep. The game after this that they made was Spider-Man Something in Time. It was just a I don't remember, Edge of Time, I think, or something like that.
Yep. Which
apparently was not great, and I have not played myself. And they've kind of petered off since then. But Shattered Dimensions is definitely like peak Beanox Spider-Man games, and I think there's some really good stuff in there, so I'd recommend it. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send in your conspiracy theories about what our parents were secretly up to behind our backs when they left us alone at our aunt's place one night, to mediumshift@gmail.com. Next episode, well, once again, I don't even know why I need to tease this. It's going to be a continuation of a lot of what we're talking about this week, just with more Spider-Man puns, probably, if my memory serves me with this movie.
Get ready to have your heart broken. we're doing The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Woo, 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 woo. And then we'll finally be done with this goddamn reboot franchise. Until next time, fare thee well.
Promises you can't keep are the best kinds of promises.